All right, everybody. We are filling in for poor Terry Green. Just to catch you up, I think, was it Friday that Holly called me? Terry had been out of town. She had had COVID the week before, and he was having some kind of bad reaction. He thought it might be something serious, so they went into the ER, started testing him for everything, and thought it was symptoms of meningitis, which made him really nervous. And those tests were coming back negative. And then they realized they thought it was an allergic reaction to amoxicillin. So as soon as he got on some antibiotics and stuff, he started clearing up, which was great for them. But that means that's the second weekend in a row they've been out with sickness. So I'm filling in again. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take another lesson out of this book called The Peacemaker. The Peacemaker is a book that was written by a guy named Ken Sande almost a couple of decades ago. And Mr. Sande used to be an attorney. He used to be a lawyer. His reason for doing that was he thought that he could help people work through conflicts as a lawyer. What he came to find out was that the legal system is not really set up to resolve conflicts. They're just there to kind of stoke them and make money off of them. And so he thought, I can't keep doing this. So he quit, and through Bible study and consulting with other people, came up with a 12-chapter book using the Bible to help people work through conflicts. And they started a mediation service and all kinds of stuff. So some of the principles that you've heard me preaching and teaching since April, May, some of those things have come from his material. The slippery slope, that came from his material. Some of the things we looked at last week came from his material. And he has a really great section on Abigail and looking at Abigail in the Old Testament and how she resolved the conflict between her husband and David as a great example of how to help people. And so we're going to look at that and basically do an expository study through 1 Samuel 25 this morning. But before we do that, let's say a prayer. Can I get one of the gentlemen in the room to volunteer to do that? Amen. All right, so before we get into 1 Samuel 25, let me pull my Bible out here. Let's talk about the difference between cooperative versus competitive negotiation. Say you have a disagreement, and you bring the two people with a disagreement together. You have two approaches, cooperative versus competitive. What's the difference between the two? Okay, is that what you're going to say, Byron? Okay. I think those are both good descriptions. Talk me through the possible, I'm being generous, the possible weaknesses of competitive negotiation. So let's give an example. You have the last piece of birthday cake and two kids. You got to split it. If you're using competitive negotiation, what is that going to look like? Okay, there's a winner and a loser. Are both parties going to be equally satisfied? Okay, someone's going to feel like they got the better end of the deal. Someone's going to feel like they got the shaft, right? So the first point is competitive negotiation fails to produce the best result, okay, how long are those two kids going to sit at the table arguing over that piece of cake? Okay, it also depends on who you give the knife to. All right, my mom usually set it up that, okay, you get to cut, but they get to pick first. So what does that force you to do? Okay, if I know I'm cutting, but they get first pick, I'm going to make that as equal as I can, right? Which was pretty smart on her end. But you cut it, what does the person picking first do? They study that thing from every angle, and they're going to weigh it, and which one has the tallest frosting, and it takes them forever to pick, right? So the second point is this. Competitive negotiation is usually inefficient. It takes longer. I mean, I'll give you a real life example. I was sharing this, I think, with somebody here a couple of weeks ago. We have some friends back in Kentucky that had a bunch of kids, a sweet family, went to church with them, and they bought what they thought was their dream property. You know, they needed to get a bigger place, and they bought this house. It had a great shop on it. They were all excited about it, and they closed on it. So, you know, the title goes in their name. They're supposed to start making payments on the loan, and they realized that the back corner of their shop actually got built across the property line with the people behind them. So the back corner of their shop really doesn't belong to them. It belongs to the neighbors. And the neighbors don't want to give it up. And so they had a choice to make. You take ownership, you're accepting it as it is, and you're going to be fighting with that neighbor the rest of your life. Or you go to court with the real estate agents and the neighbor and the previous owner, and it took them years to settle that thing. They couldn't move into it. They were making mortgage payments on a house they couldn't live in to settle that real estate mess. Because it was competitive. Everyone was trying to get the most out. It was just a mess, right? Which goes to this point. The siblings are looking at the piece of cake, and the one cuts it as fair as he can, and he's like, oh, I did that wrong. That one's actually bigger. And the sibling takes the bigger piece. How does the sibling feel they got the smaller piece? Yeah, they get mad. Yeah, competitive negotiation usually damages relationships. Like, you might get your argument settled at the end of the day, but you don't feel very good with the person that beat you, right? So, competitive negotiation is not necessarily the best. Cooperative, when applicable, is a more desirable. Let me rattle off a couple of passages that I think fit with that. And I'm just going to cite them and quote them. Matthew 22, verse 39, Jesus said, love your neighbor as yourself. If those two kids with a piece of cake are applying love your neighbor as yourself, then the one who's cutting, how fair is he going to try to be? As fair as he can. What about the one who's picking? I'm not going to just grab the first one. I might. If I saw my kid doing that, I'd be praising him up and down, right? That's true. 1 Corinthians 13:5, love is not self-seeking, or love is not selfish. Matthew 7, verse 12, so in everything, do to others what you would have them do to you, for this sums up the law and the prophets. Make your kids apply that to that cake. Which piece would you like your sibling to give to you? And watch them just try to spin how to get the biggest one. Okay. Philippians 2, verses 3 and 4. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but in humility consider others better than yourselves. For each of you should not look only to your own interests, but also to the interests of others. I like what he says there and the way he words it. Like, we all have interests. We all have desires. And he's not saying you should never, ever, ever consider yours. But he's saying you need to make sure that you pay attention to others as well. Does that make sense? You need to have a balanced approach to that. Okay. Any questions or comments so far? Ron? No? Just looked like you're about to say something. Okay. Well, this is what we're going to do. Someone came up with this acronym, PAUSE, P-A-U-S-E. And we're going to see how it applies to Abigail in 1 Samuel 25. So PAUSE stands for prepare, affirm relationships, understand interests, search for solutions, and evaluate options. Okay, P-A-U-S-E. So 1 Samuel 25. And we're going to look at the whole chapter. Someone tell me what has happened in the life of David up to this point. We kind of have to get some backstory here. Okay, that's true. We're to the point. He has killed Goliath. All right. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So he's been anointed, like textually, sequentially, that happened in the text. He was anointed, so he knows he's supposed to be the next king. Okay, he's killed Goliath, so he has national recognition. Everyone knows who he is. Saul has scooped him up and made him his son-in-law, right? David has been going out waging war for Saul, and he's also on the lam from Saul. Saul has gotten to the point where he's been trying to kill him. So David has been trying to provide for himself and for his men who are following him. And one of the ways that he's been doing that is basically private security jobs. I mean, that's what we would call it. He's been going out and hiring his guys out to protect individuals and their livestock. And that kind of brings us to chapter 25. Yeah, he's shown great humility, right? He has not exacted vengeance on Saul. Okay, well, let's look at the first paragraph here. How far down do I want to go? Let's read verses 1 through 8. Can someone read that, please? Okay, there are a lot of lessons we could take just from those first 8 verses. So David, after the death of Samuel, in verse 1, goes down to the wilderness of Paran, and in that area, there was a man named Nabal, who was really rich. Verse 2, he had 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats, and it came to be that time of year where he's shearing the sheep at Carmel. What, you know, later on in the chapter, what does the name Nabal mean? Abigail's going to say it. His name means fool. And names had great significance in the Old Testament. So I don't know what his mom was thinking when she gave birth and she was like, fool. I don't know if she was like, fool, I had this kid. Or I don't know. But she named this guy Fool. And Abigail's point is he's living up to his name, or living down to his name. What does it say about his character in verse 2? I'm sorry, 3. Harsh and badly behaved. So to all of the unmarried young ladies, avoid Nabals. Don't marry a Nabal. Try to pay attention to how he behaves and if he's harsh or not. For all the young men who are not married yet, don't be a Nabal. Okay? For those of us who are married, don't be a Nabal. Like, this is his reputation. Everyone knows that this is the way that he is. And it's going to get worse. Like, his behavior is going to be described even more accurately here in a little bit. So David, in verse 4, heard that it was time to shear the sheep. That's when all the wool is going to get sold. That's when they're going to start to celebrate. Like, this is basically harvest when it comes to being a shepherd. And so David's ready to get paid. He's sent his guys out and kept these sheep safe. He's ready to get paid. And so he sends 10 young men in verse 5. And what does he tell them to say in his name? Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead, Ron. Yeah. Yes. Right. Well, yeah. So there are other people that look like David's guys, but they're bandits. And so you see David's guys that are they're carrying their weapons, they look kind of rough. And David's like, we're not one of those guys. You didn't suffer any loss when we were with you. So you think about like when you have a contractor, a subcontractor, you send them out to do the job. They submit the invoice, and you go and inspect the work to make sure that the contract was fulfilled, and then you pay them. And that's basically what David is doing. We did a job for you. Time is done. These are my guys here to collect the invoice, and you can check with your people we did the work. But there's something really important in the chapter to note, and we're going to play off of it in a second. Go ahead. Yes. He doesn't give him a specific number. Whatever's in your heart to give. Like, he's really gracious. He's really gracious. I wish I had contractors like that. Look at verse 6. There's a word that's repeated multiple times. Peace. Peace to you, peace to your house, peace on everything that you've got. Okay, so pay attention to that threefold. Peace, peace, peace. Because we're going to see that come up again in a second. Any thoughts or questions down through here? Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Shalom. That's right. That's right. And the idea of the Jewish idea of shalom or peace isn't just the idea of a lack of hostility. It's the idea of wholeness or completeness or healthy, right? Very good. Okay. Well, let's read the next section, starting about verse 9 and going through 13. Someone want to read 9 through 13? Okay. Look at the end of verse 8 for just a second. When David's speech that he gives to his young men is completed, how does David want them to describe themselves to Nabal? When they submit the invoice, what do they call themselves? Yeah, please give whatever you have at hand to your servants and to your son David. It's an expression of humility. He's placing himself beneath Nabal, right? So he's lowering himself in the request. So when Nabal responds in verse 9, the young men give the invoice, they give the speech, and then they wait to see what he's going to say. And then in verse 10, what does Nabal say? Yeah, he's even more insulting than that. Who are you? Yeah, who knows? Like, I've never heard of this David guy. Is that true? He happens to know that he's the son of Jesse. Oops. Do you remember after David starts fighting for Saul, what do the young girls in the kingdom start doing? You remember? Yeah, they start singing songs about David. Saul has slain his thousands, but David, good-looking David, has killed his 10,000s. All the girls in the kingdom are singing this song about how great David is. Does Nabal know who he is? Come on. Like, he's super popular, he's good-looking, he's young, he's kind of roaming around like Robin Hood all over the place. And Nabal's like, I don't know who you are. You don't deserve any of my money. Like, he is insulting him up and down. Not only that, what does he say at the end of verse 10? That are doing what? Like, I don't know who you are, man, but I've heard that there are a lot of people being, like, faithless to their masters. You one of those guys? What has David done in relation to Saul? He has, but David is running from Saul. He's running from King Saul. And how do you think Saul is spinning that with his people? Faithless servant. I gave him my daughter, and I gave him a life, and I gave him his reputation, and he's just running around, running away from me. Okay? So Nabal is insulting David in a serious way here. And then verse 11, what does he say? Yeah, this is really important. I'm going to read it again, but I'm going to verbally emphasize the pronouns, okay? Shall I take my bread and my water and my meat that I have killed for my shearers and give it to men who come from I don't know where? Lots of I's and me's. He's being so stinking selfish, right? Now, the only reason that Nabal has anything is because God has blessed him. And the only reason that it's currently safe is because David and his men have done their job. Okay, but he's not acknowledging any of that. How did David's young men respond to Nabal? They are really smart. Like, I'd be so tempted. My jaw would be on the ground. And if I had a weapon with me, I'd be so tempted to grab it. But they just stood there and took it while this guy insulted David. They're just like, okay, we're going to go explain to him what you said. And they walk out and they go back and they tell David. And then how does David respond? Saddle up the horses, boys. I mean, that's really what he does. You remember back in verse 6, what's the word that's repeated 3 times? Shalom, peace. There's a word repeated 3 times in verse 13, and it's not shalom. What is it? Yeah, every man strap on his sword, and every man strapped on his sword, and David also strapped on his sword. We've gone from peace to you are doomed. That's right. That's right. And how many? 400 guys. 10 came down to ask for payment and to carry it back. Like, only 10 guys were going to carry this stuff back. But now 400 trained warriors, like these are the mighty men of David, because David's been so insulted, are writing down, ready to kill every male. Like, that's scary. Now, you kind of got to play this out like a movie, because we're being given information that Nabal doesn't have yet. You know, the 10 guys leave, and Nabal's like, I just got out of having to pay the contractor. I get to keep all that money and everything they did for me. Man, life is good. But these guys go back, and while he's getting ready to party, David and his guys are saddling up and getting their weapons, and they're going to come rolling into town. Okay, so we're jumping back and forth in the story. Any thoughts or questions down through about verse 13? Okay, at the very least, I'll give you that. Yeah. What he's just done. Yeah. Listen, there are fools that are just that way. Okay? I know several conflicts where when it gets competitive, at least one person in a competitive conflict is not thinking through all the factors. They're not thinking through the long-term effects. They're not thinking through the cost. Like, their focus is so short-sighted. They just want to win in the moment. But they pay a heavy price for it, right? There's one place where there was a conflict between a couple of neighbors, and I know one of the individuals went to the sheriff. He stopped by the police station on his way home from work. He's like, I need some help to negotiate with this guy. Nothing is working. And the sheriff was like, well, where do you live? Who's your neighbor? And dad gave him the name, and the sheriff said, that man is a donkey of a man, and he's never had a good idea unless he thought of it first. Like, you're not going to negotiate with this guy. There's just no negotiating with this guy. Like, that's the reputation he had. So, we come back down, and let's get to what happens at the ranch while David is getting his group together. So we're going to pick up in verse 14 and read down through, let's see, how far do we want to go? 14 through 17. Can someone please read that? This is horrible. So one of the young men of the house saw the interaction between Nabal and David's men. And so they rush to Abigail to explain what took place. How did the servant describe Nabal's speech? In verse 14. He railed at him. What does it sound like when someone rails? Okay. I was going to say, is it quiet? The tone is harsh. Is that consistent with what we know so far? It puts a different, maybe it intensifies our understanding of what happened. Like, could Nabal have been, man, I don't know. I don't know who David is. And there are a lot of people breaking away. But then when you hear the word rail, that's not the tone. He was angry and in their face. Okay. What did the servant verify in verse 15 and 16? The job got done. So like what David and his men claim is true. The job that they did was done well. In verse 17, how does the servant answer their speech? Yeah, think about this for a second. The household servant could look far enough down cause and effect and go, this is not good. This could end really badly. Nabal's oblivious. Like, Nabal is not thinking. He's not dealing with reality, okay? But the household servant is. And I appreciate how humble the household servant is. He's not in a position to change anything, but he's putting it in front of Abigail and saying, okay, decide what you can do. Right? Yes. Yes. Now, there's a really important thing in here. We read it, but I want to speak about it for a second. For anybody in a position of responsibility or authority, every husband in the room, what does he say at the end of verse 17 about Nabal? He's worthless. He's so worthless, you can't reason with this guy. Like, I can't go to him and say this because he's not going to listen to me. He'd probably beat me. What does that say about Nabal, and what should we try to avoid? Yeah. Yeah. Man, I can't talk to Dad about anything because Dad's just going to fly off the handle, or Dad's going to rail at me, or Dad's going to whatever. Or a wife, I mean, imagine a wife. I can't talk to him because he's just going to shove his way more. Or, you know, if that's the way the hired help feels, there's a reason. There's a reason. And I'm going to suggest this, like, as we get into what Abigail does to respond here, she's in a difficult position. Because she's got to do something without Nabal knowing, because if Nabal knew, he'd stop it or get in the way of it or squash it. But she's got to do something. Okay, so we need to understand the position that she's in. Let's read 18 through 22, please. Through 22. Okay. We started this by talking about looking to the interests of others and cooperative versus competitive negotiation. What is being negotiated in this chapter? In a second, it's going to be their lives, but what's the original thing? What was it that David was seeking? Payment. And what was Nabal refusing? Payment for services. So there's this point of, are you going to pay me or are you not going to pay me? That's the thing. And what has it devolved into? Is this cooperative or competitive? Competitive. David's going to come down and right the stain that's been put on his honor and get payment. So it's turned into more than just payment. It's turned into, you have insulted the anointed king of Israel. He's not going to stand for that. And on his way down with his men, what is going on in verses 21 and 22? What is David doing? It's really close to, like, he's made a conviction, right? But he's like reciting this in his heart. He's like nursing the wound. And we do that. Like when we're negotiating for something or we think we've been wrong, we'll talk in our heads about, man, I can't believe so-and-so said that or they did that. They think this, and we start to spin out other things and our plans to make it right. And David's just, he's in that headspace. Okay? So while he's writing down, what has Abigail done in the first couple of verses? With what? Food. It is a lot of food. Now, we could make a joke about the weight of a man's heart is through his stomach. But that's like, this is payment. This is what David was looking for. They had been working to be able to take care of their families. Yes. 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 He has to know. I mean, yeah, it's very arrogant. He's living up to his name, right? He's just a moron. Okay, that's true. He's untouchable. Yeah. Yeah, he's wrong. He's about to learn how wrong he is. All right, let's pick up in verse 23. And this is slightly longer, so I'll go ahead and pick this one up and read it for the sake of time. I'm going to go through 31, 23 through 31. When Abigail saw David, and before we read it, I want you to be looking as we go. Pay attention to how Abigail addresses David and try to keep track of her logic. Okay? When Abigail saw David, she hurried and got down from the donkey and fell before David on her face and bowed to the ground. She fell at his feet and said, "On me alone, my Lord, be the guilt. Please let your servant speak in your ears and hear the words of your servant. Let not my Lord regard this worthless fellow Nabal, for as his name is, so is he. Nabal is his name, and folly is with him. But I, your servant, did not see the young men of my Lord whom you sent. Now then, my Lord, as the Lord lives, and as your soul lives, because the Lord has restrained you from blood guilt and from saving with your own hand, now then let your enemies and those who seek to do evil to my Lord be as Nabal. And now let this present that your servant has brought to my Lord be given to the young men who follow my Lord. Please forgive the trespass of your servant, for the Lord will certainly make my Lord a sure house, because my Lord is fighting the battles of the Lord, and evil shall not be found in you so long as you live. If men rise up to pursue you and seek your life, the life of my Lord shall be bound up in the bundle of the living in the care of the Lord your God. And the lives of your enemies he shall sling out as from the hollow of a sling. And when the Lord has done to my Lord according to all the good that he has spoken concerning you, and has appointed you prince over Israel, my Lord shall have no cause of grief or pangs of conscience for having shed blood without cause for my Lord, or for my Lord working salvation for himself. And when the Lord has dealt well with my Lord, then remember your servant." Just a lot of my lords in there. All right, so how does Abigail present herself? Okay, she drops. Now, David has been insulted as if he's just a random, faithless runaway servant. He's really the anointed king of Israel. So when Abigail meets him, she drops like she should in front of the king of Israel. And then what does she say? How does she address David? My Lord, my Lord, my Lord, my Lord, my Lord, my Lord, like all over the place. She just keeps calling him my Lord. And what does she call herself? I'm your servant, I'm your servant. What does she apologize for at the beginning? Who does she say the fault lies on? Why? Well, that's in the background. Yeah, she's saying, I am so sorry. This is all my fault. I didn't know you were there. If I had known you were there, this never would have happened. Is it really her fault? But she's taking responsibility. This week, I was so frustrated. I watched one of the Senate hearings, the committee hearings, as they were talking to the head of the Secret Service. I got so frustrated with how many times that woman said, you know, the buck stops with me, I'm taking responsibility, I'm taking responsibility. And they kept saying, so what are you going to do? Well, nothing. Who's going to get fired? Nobody. Do you think you should resign? No. But I'm taking responsibility. Saying it and doing it are two totally different things. And she's saying it and doing it. She's saying, I'm going to take responsibility. Here I am. Here's payment. It's really impressive. Is that all she says? Yeah, she knows that he is supposed to be king. She knows it. Because she says, look, when the Lord makes you prince over Israel. So she starts reasoning with David and making him think about what the long-term consequences will be if he rides down and kills Nabal's household today. She's reasoning with him because she's thoughtful not just of her own safety and the safety of her household, but she's also thinking about David's interests, his future interests. What would happen to David if he obliterated Nabal's family today, and then later on he gets installed as king? What would opponents do with that? Always, hey, you're the guy that killed that whole household over that dumb little payment about the animals. Yeah. She's trying to protect his reputation. Yeah. 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 Yes. Yeah. So think through, I know we just rattled through the acronym. Is she prepared? She has the food is with her. It's not just promised, she can deliver on it right then. She's also prepared. She knows who's involved. She knows what's at stake. So she's prepared. Has she affirmed relationships? Look, you are the king. I'm submitting myself to you like you're the king. I know you're going to be like she's thinking about that. Does she understand David's interests? It's not just about the food anymore. And so she's taking care of that. Has she sought a creative solution? 100%. Are they evaluating options objectively and reasonably? And this is what I mean. All the way down, David is just nursing his hurt. And it was a legitimate hurt, but he's just nursing it and nursing it. Yeah. Yeah. So she gets there, and she's helping him slow down and think. Just take a breath, take a beat. Let's think through this. And she's doing a great job with that. So David listens to her. We'll just kind of speed up through the rest of this. Verse 32, David said to Abigail, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of Israel, who sent you to me to meet me. Blessed be your discretion, and blessed be you." That's the third set of threes in the chapter. Peace, peace, peace. Sword, sword, sword. Blessed, blessed, blessed. David has come full circle. Right? You kept me from blood guilt today. And so he blesses her. He tells her to go up to her house in verse 35. Verse 36, Abigail gets there. Nabal is drunk because he's partying like a king. He's insulted the real king, but he's partying like a king. So she decides not to talk to him that night. She waits. In the morning, when the wine had gone out of him, his wife told him all these things in verse 37, and his heart died within him. He became as a stone. And about 10 days later, the Lord struck Nabal, and he died. So he really hasn't thought through what he did. He had no idea. So while Abigail is meeting David, Nabal's home partying. He has no clue what's going on. Like, he is minutes away from having people write down the And David turns around. Abigail comes back. He just keeps partying. And then in the morning, when he's hungover, she says, "Hey, by the way, this is where I was last night. This is what I did." It freaks out. Now, we know eventually, when David finds out in verse 39 that Nabal was dead. Blessed be the Lord. He said, yeah, blessed be the Lord who has avenged the insult I received, and who has kept his servant from wrongdoing. He sees Abigail as being used by God to keep him from being killed. And then he ups and married her, which she was ill suited to Nabal. Absolutely, and we'll be praying that Terry can come back and finish his last few lessons. That's right. That's right. Thank you. My pleasure.